My name is Adrian Boudou. I'm the Managing Director of Theater Offensive. A little bit more about me. I joined TTO 4.5 years ago, coming from the corporate background. Over 15 years of experience in finance, marketing, publishing, and now nonprofit management. I also sit on the board of TCG. I'm one of the newest members. And you may know this, but Boston is currently going through a cultural planning process. And I sit on the leadership arm that's helping the new commissioner guide that process through its creation. And Julie came from Chicago, so Chicagoans should know a little bit about her. She's wonderful. So it's a little bit about me. Abe?
Sure, hi, and I'm Abe Rybeck. I'm the Executive Artistic Director at the Theater Offensive and the founder of it. We started back in the 80s, so I'll give a little bit more detail on that later. More recently, I'm also an active participant in the Boston Cultural Change Network, which is a network of a couple dozen progressive arts organizations in Boston that are trying to change the culture of the city. And then also, I'm the current chair of the board of the National Performance Network and Visual Artists Network, based in New Orleans. And Adrian?
Yeah, so at the Theater Offensive, we're all about telling stories. And today's agenda, it's built on that. We're gonna walk you through a story, a process, how we came from a grassroots organization founded 26 years ago by Abe. So we'll go through the story of our mission, our values, how we first engaged with our constituents to engage in a strategic planning process. We'll then go into a quick discussion about opportunities and trends that came out of that discussion, which then launched into our current programmatic approach to our work, which is called Out in Your Neighborhood. And we'll guide you through a story of the first 3 years of that plan, followed by the next 5 years, which we're currently in year 2.5. Wrap it up with some key learnings and open it up for Q&A.
If you have burning questions that come up as we're going along, that you want to just cut to the chase, and please just interrupt, it's fine. Yes?
I actually have a burning question.
Yeah.
When you mentioned that 12 progressive arts organizations part of this, but can you tell me which 12 those are, or at least give me an idea?
The Boston Cultural Change Network, I can remember some. There's actually 24. Excuse me. It ranges, I think the largest is the Boston Children's Museum. Actually, Arts Emerson is also part of it, and that's very large. Company One, which is
but
here.
We don't have Boston Opera, Ballet.
None of those.
So the reason behind the collective. So that's a good jumping off start to go. Javier Torres, program officer of the Boston Foundation, convened these organizations, more than 24 of us, who our mission, there was a built-in social justice element to it. Hence these organizations that were listed. And we're committed to using the arts as a platform for social justice, equity, and fair treatment of our community. And that's the premise of how it's built.
Thank you.
And I think in the moment of formation, it was largely around racial justice issues.
Correct.
And that continues to be a top priority of that work. Thank you for asking that question, and if anything comes up along the way, feel free to interrupt, and we can address things then unless we're already planning to talk more about it later.
And we could use that as an example to talk about how we're changing the conversation in terms of how we approach fundraising with funders at foundations.
Is Catherine Peterson involved?
Tangentially. No, so Arts Boston is not a member of that coalition. No. So it was people that had social justice, as you said, in their mission statement, were social justice and racial justice issues. So I'm going to give you a little history.
No. Me first.
So, go ahead.
Oh,
All right.
so
Attention.
I apologize for looking at my phone.
No, I asked
My
him to please
notes.
interrupt me when I screw up like that.
So my notes are on my phone, so if I'm doing that, I'm not being rude. So our mission, there it is. It's we present the diversity in LGBT lives and art so bold. It breaks through personal isolation, challenges the status quo, and builds thriving communities. What we found in the process, Abe will explain that later, through the history of the organization, that mission has remained relevant in every aspect of our work. So during that process, we took time and looked at the mission. Is it still relevant? And the consensus was yes. These stories still needs to be told. Our mission. Our values, 4 key values. We believe that creating original art with our neighbors and the communities and where we serve is very important to live our mission. We work in 4 neighborhoods of Boston: Dorchester, Roxbury, Jamaica Plain in the South End. These are all neighborhoods with diversity, income inequities, and so on. We believe in the value of outness, and I will get into more of this discussion in another slide, but as most of you know, being out in the queer world is sharing your sexual identity with people very proudly. And what we've done at the Theater Offensive, we've taken that value of coming out, but focused it through an anti-racism lens, which we'll get into later on. Number 3, in the queer world, in the world in general, we have many identities, and telling someone to give up a certain identity so we can focus on the queer identity, it's not right. So we believe that for us to address homophobia and defeat it, we must look at our work through an anti-racist lens. And at the core of everything we do is holding these 2 things together. For us to defeat homophobia, we must dismantle racism. And 4th, equity, diversity, and inclusion. We believe that for us to be good at what we do, we need a board, staff, and people in our family who are reflective of the communities and where. So we're intentional about everything that we do in terms of hiring practices, fundraising, how we speak to each other internally, how we recruit board members. So everything we do is under this lens.
So now I will say a little bit about the history of the Theater Offensive. In 1984 in Boston.
Yeah. Comment, I'm so sorry. I thought that was very bold. I loved it. It's so bold, and the words that you use are so action. It's a great mission statement. Really, very good.
Thank you very much. It was fascinating when we've gone through so much change over the years to find out even when we spread out and asked people in the community who had no insider involvement in the Theater Offensive, when we check in about that mission statement, it resounds for people. It makes sense for what we're trying to do. So that's really, we're glad we found it. So in 1984 in Boston, historically racism was white hot. In our communities, people were dying in massive numbers, mysteriously from AIDS that had just really started to become understood. There still, at that point, wasn't good testing, and when testing was found, it was used to discuss things like putting people in concentration camps. So I just want to, for the younger people in the room, remind folks that this was a true crisis moment. At the same time, Reagan's wars in Central America were raging, and a lot of the Latino members of our community and others of us were doing activism on those issues. A group of about 15 radical queer friends got together and started doing activism together. We called ourselves United Fruit Company, I'm sorry, all political reference, but anyway, we were out there doing the activism, and what we found out right away was, one day we were at a demonstration, we were doing a sit-in, and we had some brilliant chant like, "Arrest us, arrest us, arrest us," or something like that, until the police arrested us, And then we chanted something like, "Let us go, let us go, let us go." And we're like, God, we're putting our lives on the line here, and even we think we're boring, so this has got to change. And that's when I and one of the other guys just went home that night, wrote a skit, the next day came back, and we thought our goal was like, we want, when the secretaries walk out of that building for lunch, we want them to stop and watch and listen and get engaged. Because nobody was paying attention to these demonstrations. So the next day we're putting on our skit, and the secretaries come out of the building and they walk right past us. And I'm like, oh, the Holy Grail, and it's slipping through our fingers. But then one secretary kind of did a double take of like, what's going on over there? And like grabbed the elbow of a couple others, and a half dozen secretaries watched us do our skit. And I was like, this is amazing. We're doing this thing about, stopping the embargo in Nicaragua that Reagan was pushing. And these secretaries with whom we have nothing in common are watching. And we finished the show and they came over to us and they were like, well, Nicaragua, whatever. And we give them our propaganda. And they said, but, the secretary who had grabbed the elbow said, I'm really glad you're doing this. My best friend from high school died last month of AIDS, and he really would have loved what you're doing here. And that was when we realized that this put on a skit thing was a chance to connect with people with whom we had assumed we had nothing in common, and to find out that's not true. We have this common humanity that we can work from. For 5 years, we just existed as a guerrilla street theater troupe. And then in 1989, we wanted to build something that could last longer and could be more ambitious. And that's when the theater offensive officially started. In 1992, we started the Out on the Edge theater festival, queer theater festival, which was one of the largest queer theater festivals in the world and ran for 18 years. And then in '93, we became a resident theater company at the Boston Center for the Arts in the South End. And so started having kind of like this sense of a season and things like that. And then in 1994, we started the True Colors Out Youth Theater program, which was one of the first queer youth theater programs anywhere, and is now the longest running anywhere and the largest. Let's see, is there anything else I need to cover in history here? I don't think so. Take it away. Oh.
You missed it.
Oh.
This is why we
Look at
work
this.
well together.
Yeah.
The entire.
Oh yeah. History first, that was on the last slide. Engagement and planning process. Okay, this is juicy. So, the True Colors Out Youth Theater program, I'm going to tell you another quick story here. I got 2009, so that's our 20th anniversary of becoming the Theater Offensive, right? Built a new approach to all of our work, the Theater Offensive out in your neighborhood. And there were tough trends that were going on in the world at that time that informed how we wanted to organize that. So conventional theater audiences, we saw the evidence today, we're shrinking then and they're still shrinking now. And the business models we had were weakening. So while at the Boston Center for the Arts, where we were a resident company, there was some queer-related work playing in one of those theaters pretty much any month of the year. While in other neighborhoods, you couldn't, well, not only could you not find a queer play, you couldn't find any play at all in lots of neighborhoods. Racism, homophobia, poverty, and violence were threatening every neighborhood, right? This was a huge part of our lives that was going unaddressed by most arts companies in a concrete way. And I was especially struck by something that Nicki Brown said. Nicki was an intern at the Theater Offensive in 2009, who was the lead administrator for this strategic planning process that we were about to start. And at our first meeting, she said to everyone gathered, look, I am the future of the Theater Offensive. Mm-hmm. I'm a 19-year-old black young woman who loves my queer theater, and you need to hear this from me. When I walk down the street and I see a poster up for a show at the Theater Offensive at the Boston Center for the Arts, the name of the show might as well be Nicki Brown. This is not for you. I don't want to go there and get attitude from the person at the box office because they have some stereotype of me. I don't want to walk into a theater, sit down, have the lights go up, the show starts, something's funny to me, I laugh, and the person next to me shushes me. This is all experiences that I want to avoid, and none of my friends are interested in that anymore. what are you going to do about it if I'm your future? And we found that to be a big charge.
Which led into opportunities. And, taking Nicki Brown's story, it's what out in your neighborhood is, that's our programmatic approach to the work. It's creating art with our queer and allied neighbors in the neighborhoods of Boston and keeping the integrity of that art in the neighborhood. What we tried to do at the Theater Offensive is remove all barriers to access. That's financial barriers, so ticket prices are pay what you can, so zero to pay what you can. Physical locations of our shows and our community activities are in spaces where it welcomes diversity, it welcomes equitable treatment of our constituents. And that was worth building an entire new program, which we coined Out in Your Neighborhood. Something we missed in the slide here, the strategic planning working group. This is where it gets juicy about strategic planning. And Abe, I'll start it off if you want to wrap it up.
Yeah.
What we will present is what worked for us, how we took our family, our donor family, our patrons, our community members, our activists, along this journey of 7 to 10 years journey on this new approach to our work. It took us from $500,000 4 years ago to now we're at $1.2 million. So really rapid growth. And what's important, I want to underline, is the journey with our constituents. It wasn't, here's a new plan, guys, buy into it. It was strategic thinking, or strategic planning working group. It was important to have community members on that committee, board members on that committee, where at each level of the planning process, we had folks reporting out to these various constituents to get their feedback on how to inform the plan itself. So at the end of the plan, everyone was on the same page. There weren't a lot of back and forth of what should or shouldn't happen. People were on this journey from the get-go.
Yeah, so the folks who were involved in this strategic plan working group, that was our romantic name for it, that Nicki and 3 other interns worked with me to organize, was made up of about half of the staff at every level. It was made up of about half of the board, people who were officers on the board and new members of the board. It had a strong representation of colleagues from other organizations that we had been working with closely in the communities. And then it had just rank file community members that were either fans or even ones that actually we trusted their judgment, but they weren't really consumers of what we were doing yet. People who we thought would want stuff from us, but what we had been doing so far wasn't for them. The other thing is that included in that was an ex-board member, KJ Ward, who had a lot of experience in planning. He was a consultant, and he also had been the head of an agency that we worked with very closely that worked with homeless LGBT youth. And he became a de facto consultant for us, unpaid, so none of this cost us any dollars to shell out, but we had people that were acting as consultants in a way. That makeup ended up being really important. It's at a time in our history when we were completely broke, money-wise, and so asking people to say, can you spend real time with us? We said, we'll spend money on food. That's all we can spend money on here, but we're gonna have meals together that we'll share. And it was about a 9-month process that we went through together, meeting every 4 to 6 weeks, and then there was homework in between. That started in the fall of '09, and then the board, I should mention, we made the first presentation to the board in February of 2010, and they rejected it. The plan, the Out in Your Neighborhood plan. Their feedback was that the proposal read like a logic model, and they wanted a poem. So something really important for you to remember if you're entering into this stuff, that a strategic plan has to be concrete and real, has to lay things out for people. But a work plan, it is not. It has to inspire people. So it needs language that we as artists uniquely are qualified to produce. They went back to the drawing board and created a strategic plan that they fell in love with and cared about. Yeah.
I'm really curious about the homework or heavy lifting that you asked
Mhm.
of your sort of volunteer consultants. Like, can you give me some examples of like what are some of the real tasks?
I think the simplest answer is that there is not a sentence in that strategic plan that KJ didn't edit. So, but the
Was the
so
homework
that's
yours?
Pardon me.
Was the homework yours and then he corrected it?
There was homework for probably about half the people in the working group. So a lot of the folks who had not been heavily involved before, but now were pouring themselves into this process, we weren't saying go home and write something about the theater offensive. But the interns were all drafting things, taking cracks at things. I was, other staff people, board members, and then KJ looked through all these versions of things and edited and chose the best material.
Got it.
Yes.
So when you say they wanted a poem, you literally mean they wanted a poem?
I can emphasize.
Thank you. No.
So, in our experience, the strategic plan is a beautifully written idea. It's not a working plan, it's not an action plan. It's the heart and soul of what we do. It's something we leverage with our funders to take them on this story. It's built in a logic model. Yes, there is a logic to what we do, but it's a narrative that really gets to folks of why this should go on this journey with the Theater Offensive. You can only say so many. Some of our patrons and donors require numbers, quantifiable in data. With the strategic plan, we were able to share the qualitative data, why this idea was important. It's important because for someone like Nicki Brown, it's important for Nicki to walk down the street in any neighborhood of Boston and see a poster and know that she's included in that play. She can go to a space and be comfortable that because of her body and who she is, she's comfortable. She's able to relate to the actors and actresses on stage. She can see herself on that stage. So the strategic plan is this beautifully written idea. And we'll talk about the operational plan that follows that. But
Yeah. Something that I didn't mention that I should have is that throughout the history of the Theater Offensive, a majority of the work that we had presented was by artists of color, and the majority was by women. With the shift in approach to the out in your neighborhood way of doing things, that became almost all of the work was by people of color, which was a statement isn't the right word. It was a strategy that we chose largely because that's what was missing from what was being supplied by the market. You know, this is what was needed that wasn't being accomplished. And in terms of queer identities, the intersectionality that you were talking about before, Adrian, was exactly the site of excitement in our movement and exactly what was being avoided by most other arts groups. So we took on that as our work.
any questions? So out of the programmatic approach, out in your neighborhood, came our vision and the impact. So as you know, vision, it's big picture, high in the sky, the big idea. Every Boston neighborhood enjoys inclusive out culture in day-to-day life. What that relates, every out resident actively participate in efforts that build neighborhood diversity, equity, safety, and vitality.
Adrian, do you think that you acknowledged or not that existed in general, and did that matter? That every Boston enjoys inclusive culture in their day-to-day life. Did you assume that was present or not, or it didn't matter?
So, based on Nicki's story, and based of many stories in Boston, for Boston, it's a very politically progressive city, but it's very segregated. The art in Boston is considered the big institutions. A lot of folks in these neighborhoods going to a Theater Offensive show, whether it's a main stage production or any community activity, it's the only time they'll have access to art. And access to the creativity of art, but access where all the barriers to getting into that space, all those barriers are removed. So yes, this is very relevant, and it is what's needed in Boston.
I think that I would add, when you say, were you asking?
If you take out, is there an assumption that there is culture in day-to-day life for most Bostonians?
That's a great question. I wanted to say, so we do extensive evaluation of this stuff, and since we started this, we've survey all of the participants, every audience member who comes in what's it called, not average, but the median, thank you. The median number of shows that a offensive theater goer has seen in the past year is 0, meaning more than half of the people that come to see our work have not seen any other show in the last year. Therefore, that means we're reaching audiences who are getting no culture in their day-to-day life that's organized.
And it's important to note, if there is a queer show in Boston, it's not in the neighborhoods where we serve.
Yeah.
So the out residents in those neighborhoods don't have access to it.
Yeah.
You were starting to say?
Oh, I was going to ask about, we do so much outreach in Baltimore, and kids from everywhere get to see a lot of shows, but I was thinking about the out population may not have the same level of children in their lives. I'm asking that question.
I'm not sure I get the question.
Well, so you're saying that in these neighborhoods that people say that they don't see a single show. Well, in all the neighborhoods in Baltimore, at a minimum, we know that all the children are going to the theater and going to the symphony, and they're going to the big things. And I'm wondering, are the children in those neighborhoods, do they have access to the arts?
Almost half of our audience each year is children, is youth 14 to 22. And so I would say no, that they're not seeing shows. These are questions that they're answering, so they're not reporting having seen a show, I'll put it that way. Yeah.
Or could it be a show that resonates with them, that really speaks to them?
That's not the
also?
question we're asking.
Yeah, you're right, yeah.
But, I mean,
Yeah,
we're
you're
asking
right,
if
you're
you've seen
right.
any show in the
Any
last
show,
year.
Yeah.
So, I think Boston may be behind Baltimore in getting the questions. Yeah,
I would just,
you already have the answer.
I'm Toby with the Boston Children's Theater. I would just echo what Dave is saying. We don't have that yet. We have a big gap in the access that's available to private schools and public schools or schools with active PTOs.
That's
And
so
the Boston
interesting,
Public School
because
system
it's primarily
really
the public school
under-resourced.
kids that we're serving.
Right. We're working hard at the other end to move the needle on
Wow.
that.
Yeah, they've been doing great work to help address that. Next slide. So, what the hell is this strategy, the out in your neighborhood approach? It has 3 basic components: creation, collaboration, and operations. And this was the strategic plan that was put out in 2010 for fiscal years 11 through 13. So this is completed. The ways that we executed this creation, collaboration, and operations was through collective creation. So for instance, our True Colors Out Youth Theater Troupe works together each season to create work based on their own experience and share it in their neighborhoods. We have neighborhood productions in which folks who are nationally regarded artists, sometimes from the Boston area, but sometimes from elsewhere, will work closely with a community and develop stage work that's ready for a higher profile that's relevant in the neighborhoods where we're working. So for instance, just recently, Sean Dorsey Dance Company came and did a series of interviews with longtime survivors of the early AIDS crisis in the neighborhoods where we work, and then used those stories as a soundscape to which they created a dance theater piece called The Missing Generation that just blew people, oh, right there. It just blew people away in our neighborhoods in Roxbury last week. In the collaboration section, kind of the most heightened part of these ongoing collaborations is the community events. So for instance, the Betances Puerto Rican Hip Parade, we'll work closely with them to make sure there's a culturally competent queer component, sorry for the alliteration I got, queer part of that parade, or the Wake Up the Earth Day in Jamaica Plain. And then operations, do you want to talk some about that?
I'll get into the next 5 years.
Okay. Okay, so I'll talk about the operations here.
And
So-
the TDC.
Oh, yeah.
Can I?
Yeah.
Can you talk just a little bit about, in terms of the community events, what process you went through to decide which groups you
Great
wanted to
question.
involve with?
That reveals something really important about this. So the first, in 2010, June of 2010, this plan was passed. And for the following 6 months, we suspended all programming other than just keeping the True Colors Troop going. And 100% of our work during that period, other than keeping True Colors, we didn't want to abandon the young people that were counting on us every week. 100% of our other time went into meeting with folks in the community and listening to what the needs were. We chose which neighborhoods we would work in based on two things. One, that there was a recognized need for what we wanted to do, so we were hearing that people wanted us to do it, which was really key. And secondly, that we had enough resources and connections in that neighborhood that we weren't like coming in, but rather we were part of it. So those were the two criteria we used to pick these 4 neighborhoods. And that 6 months of meetings was absolutely key to this working.
And it's important to note, it wasn't a rushed experience. As most of you guys know, building a network takes time, trust in each other, and that we could do each other good.
A lot of these were...
It took us a long time to build this relationship.
Yeah, a lot of them were relationships that we had been building for decades already. I mean, we had been doing this work, we had been in these neighborhoods, but this required a level of intensity that we had not devoted to it yet.
And having a strong idea, strategic plan to share with them, to take them on this journey was important and worked in our favor.
Do you have or have you developed a la Cornerstone your own methodology of engaging the community?
So,
Yes. And yes, TCG, thank you very much, funded us 2.5 years ago, the Audience Engagement Project.
Yeah.
And in terms of audience engagement, we go back to our roots, our traditional way of engaging with folks. We understand that as an arts organization, not every entry point is not for everyone. What we're selling, our product is this notion of out in your neighborhood strategic idea. And we understand that for folks within our communities, there are various entry points for them. And we use those entry points and strategically engage with folks who want to experience that side of the theater offensive. So for example, a lot of the HIV community, those are community organizations and folks who are HIV positive or in that community. Working with Sean Dorsey and the Secret History, with Sean Dorsey, Voices from the Early AIDS Epidemic, the Missing Generation. That was an entry point for HIV/AIDS organization to be like, hey, we're having this really amazing show where the sound score is actually folks in the neighborhoods of Boston sharing their stories, and it's being presented on stage. This is an entry point where there's a cross sector of science and art. And it's another way for folks to engage with us.
So, but your question is about the methodology, like what Cornerstone has for how they go through this process. And we have developed that, and it's well documented for our youth work.
Yeah.
And with the more general intergenerational work, I think we're developing that, and it's not published or anything like that. But there's a book called, from the Boston Youth Arts Evaluation Project that we were part of, and along with 4 other organizations, that does a good job of describing our methodology for the youth work. that we co-published with these 4 other groups. I want to say a little bit about what this meant for operations, this shift. It says here, improvement in governance, management, finances, and evaluation. So the idea here was that we wanted to create surplus on operations. Pretty straightforward and extremely painful change. So, raise your hand if you've been through this. I heard you like say, I want to create surplus on operations, right? Like, ouch, right? And it was, historically, we had never achieved that. And when we looked at this, we thought if we want to be making a promise, if we're asking our community to commit to us, we have to be able to commit back to them that we're going to be around in the long run to work with them. So we needed to build organizational strength. And it was a big shift from looking at ourselves as like, oh, we're this little poor arts organization, help, please, to like, we were at a lot of tables where we were viewed as the rich person at that table. And we had to take responsibility for that. We had to understand that if we're having a workshop at 6 o'clock and we're not serving food, the people who are at this workshop probably won't have dinner. You know, so there was a new approach to where we sit in our ecology and taking responsibility to have economic strength so that we can strengthen our community. I think I had one more little thing I was supposed to say about that. Let's see. Oh, that involved really painful changes. So this wonderful thing, the out in your neighborhood approach, also meant, you know, our producing director wrote herself out of a job. She's like, there's not a job for me in this. She had twin toddlers at the time and became unemployed. Another person on our staff got laid off at that point, and his green card was dependent on having a job at the Theater Offensive. He's back in Singapore now. So, you know, this was not pretty in every way. This was extremely painful. On the other hand, I have to say also with artists, we had been, with Out on the Edge Festival that I had talked about, this ended. They no longer fit into our approach. And it was our highest profile thing of the year. And people were telling us, you know, if you end this festival, people are going to think the Theater Offensive is over. And right now, even over 5 years later, when I'm at the Boston Center for the Arts, you know, people say like, "Oh, Abe, how's it going?" And I'm like, "Great." And they're like, "No, really, you can tell me." So sorry. You know, they don't see us there. They think we died or something, right? Like, no, actually, we're like 2.5 times larger than we were at that point financially, and much stronger. But for the artists who were part of the festival, who we were bringing in from around the country and around the world, it was a really painful change also. It was a much narrower band of artists who we could work with, who were willing to make the time to come and work deeply in our community. But the payoff for that was immense. So for instance, the very first group we brought in was the Pomo Afro Homos, which had been one of the first groups we had produced back when we started. And Brian Freeman is from Roxbury, where we work. So he was able to come back in and rework a revival of their first show, Fierce Love, about Black queer experience, in the place where the original sketches that he had wrote for that show took place. So he was working with people he had grown up with to recreate this show, and some of the children of the people he had grown up with. Yes?
So perhaps I missed this, but this morning, you know, there was a conversation about battling on both fronts, 2 fronts. So why was the conscious choice made to just go totally in the out direction and not try and keep your festival going and, you know, your...
That's a great question. The simple answer is we made a chart of everything we were doing. That one axis was, did it bring more resources toward the organization or pull them away from the organization? Another axis was it meeting its mission goals or not? and the third axis was its size. And the Out on the Edge Festival of Queer Theater was a great big program that had basically broke even. But in the depth of serving our mission was very modest. It wasn't really serving the mission. We were doing other things like True Colors Out Youth Theater that were making much deeper impacts and not costing as much. Is that a simple answer?
That was hard.
Painful, humiliating. To tell you the truth, I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna be so embarrassed. Like there's gonna be articles in the newspaper about how the festival failed and everything. We didn't announce it, we just didn't do it. We just moved forward and never said anything about it. And I got phone calls, like 3 total, from people like, is the festival happening this year? It was a little humbling to realize like, it wasn't news.
I'm sorry, I'm just also curious, Dave, so how, as an artistic leader, you said it was humbling, but I mean, it also had to be painful too, so how did you cope with that?
I loved every second of this other stuff that was going on, and it was right in my heart. The Out on the Edge Festival, the Boston Center for the Arts, we were paying $10,000 a week just to be in the space, and we were a resident theater company there, and it was a beautiful new space. But there we were. I mean, I remember looking out at the audience, excuse me for going off on this, I remember once I looked out at the audience in one of our shows, and the show, I loved every single show we did. It was John Kelly doing Paved Paradise, the Joni Mitchell show, which is great. But the audience, when I looked out, was, do you ever see, like, if you switch channels and you look at PBS on a Saturday night and they have they have a John Denver concert or something? You know what I'm talking about? So I looked out and it was that audience. It was like middle-aged white suburbs going like this, clapping along with John Kelly. And I was like, it's a fucking drag queen up there! You know, come on, people! What is this going on? And I just thought, like, is this really necessary? Is this what I need to be doing with my life? I guess not.
Right. I had a question on operations, and will you cover this in your finances section? When you go out in the neighborhood, are people paying for their tickets?
Almost never. So about.
Okay, and you'll talk about that.
Which is a good segue into the next
Okay,
slide. So the next 5 years, it was about deepening our relationship. So let's backtrack. The first 3 years, very successful, based on evaluation, feedback. And we decided for the next 5 years, FY14 through FY18, we're gonna deepen our relationships to what we've built in terms of programming. And the 2 things we wanna talk more about in this slide would be the operations, and the 4th strategic concentration, the idea of promoting outness as our organizing principle. So let's talk about operations. To answer your question, Abe talked about. Let's start with HR. It's important that we hire the right people to live the mission versus have the folks who are very loyal to the organization but can't live the mission. So those were some tough decisions that we made prior to this new plan. Next, it was important that retention, really talented staff, we were able to retain them. So build in cash reserves and a compensation fund to align our senior staff with the market's average. What that means, we understood that TTO is not for everyone. And it's fine if you want to come, learn something, help us with our work, and it's okay for you to leave, but compensation should not be an issue. So as a result, with Abe and the board's approval, we created a compensation fund to get all directors at the market salary. Then we use the funds to bring up all the entry-level staff to make it at the starting salary that's pretty much in line with the market.
$15 an hour at the very least.
Yeah. So everyone who comes through a door is making twice the minimum wage in Boston. Intentional. It was important to pay people a livable wage. Governance. It was important, if we are in the neighborhoods of Boston, then our board and staff should be reflective. So, strategic outreach, working with their board to understand that yes, while it's important to have a board who can give thousands of dollars, it's equally important to have a board that can really do the work in the communities. And for our patrons and the people we serve to see themselves on that board and to create a pipeline where any person in the community could have access to the board of directors. That was a shift.
That resulted in our board and staff being predominantly people of color.
Of color. With the board chair being someone of color and 2 folks in staff having directors and management positions on staff.
And over what period of time did that kind of transition occur?
Within the first 3 years.
3 years.
The 3-year strategic plan. I mean, it wasn't working from zero. It was already strong representation.
Did you find that challenging to
Sure.
find the board members that you wanted?
I think definitely, because the nature of a board, when you think of a board of directors, the reality is you think of a bunch of old white men with a lot of money making decisions about a mission that...
Well, now they're old white women.
Yeah, and old white men. You know? And so it was difficult to change people's perception of what the board of directors at the Theater Offensive mean to the community. So it took that discussion with the...
Any change on a board is work. So when you say, is it hard, the answer is sure. But any change in the status quo is hard. And so I don't want to act like this is special hard. You know, saying we need to get more money is hard. Saying all those things are hard. So it's just it's an organizational priority. You set it, and then that's what you're
Did you have
working
to ask existing board members to leave, or did you just add?
We grew the board, and I would actually, though we didn't actually have to ask anyone to leave, in a way the answer is yes. The people who were the most enthusiastic about our change, it was unanimously supported, the change, but those who were most enthusiastic about it poured themselves in, and those who were kind of like, yeah, the organization should do this, but I don't know if I should, they left. And that made room. We went from a 7-member board to a 15-member board, so that enabled the change as well. There was a 1.5 year period of time in which every single person that came onto the board was a person of color, for instance. We also, we were trying to bring young people on the board, but the young people who we work with every day said, we do want to do that, but we don't want to go onto the board the way it is now. We want you to change stuff about the board before we go on. So we also brought on people in their 20s so that teens would be interested in being there with them. So those are examples of the board changes. Yes and yes. Go ahead. Go ahead, somebody.
I'm still missing who funded this board.
We have a
That's a great question. So, okay,
We want to go there.
that's great.
We want to go there.
Okay, let's go there. What happened, I'll dive into the first round of it. So not the second 5-year plan, but the 3-year plan, right? We were not only broke, we were insolvent. So we were about to end a fiscal year 9. Anyway, we were about to end fiscal year 10 rather, when we decided to take this approach, and we were going to end the year with negative net worth. Not just unrestricted negative net worth, but across the board negative net worth. We were insolvent. With this plan, we were able to go to the individuals who had been the strongest supporters of our work over the years and say, look, it's the middle of a world economic crisis. We are not going to ask you to give us $1 gazillion now, but you've given, say, $5,000 a year on average for the last 5 years. Will you make a commitment to do that same going into the future for another 5 years? By doing that approach, we talked to I think it was about 30 people, and we got commitments totaling about $250,000 spread out over 5 years. So we were still really bad cash situation, but it changed our balance sheet so that we were, we had positive net worth.
Well, what was your annual budget at that time?
At that time, it was, well, it had just grown. From 2007, it was under 500,000. In 2009, it was 700,000. But it was that was our expenses. Our incomes were like $100,000 less than that. It was a disaster. So we were crumbling financially. When we got those individuals to commit for a 5-year commitment, we could then go to foundations, including the Ford Foundation and the Boston Foundation, and say, okay, our community is standing up for us right now, and it's not enough. You need to stand up with them, or all their commitment, or you can watch as our community stands up and we die anyway. And those two foundations came through with support, so that literally when we were passing the budget for 2010, I was like, I don't know how I can't bring this budget to the board meeting tonight. Like, I don't know what I'm gonna do. And I got a phone call that day from Roberta Uno at Ford saying yes, and I was able to make the budget work that night. So it was scary as hell.
And now how do you sustain it?
I'll get into that.
Yeah.
So, using the success from the first 3 years, the next 5 years is where I came on board the Theater Offensive. The first thing we did was went back to our board and, with the new strategic vision plan, the next 5 years, we asked folks to really invest in this idea of out in your neighborhood. Not just in their three-year term limit, but beyond that, 5-year board pledge commitments. Because of that strategy, working with board members to look at this beautiful idea invested in our community, we will get every single board member to commit to a 5-year pledge, totaling about $200,000 over the next 5 years. So this is a board of 14 strong, very committed. We were able to leverage that $200,000 gift and go to private foundations and say, hey dudes, hey gals, the board is fully committed to the Theater Offensive. It's your turn to step up. There are people in your communities, you have locations in your communities where you need to invest in the Theater Offensive out in your neighborhood. Because of that approach, we're able to get other funders, local funders and national funders to commit to multi-year gifts. So what was important in that is along the way, we were taking folks on a journey with us. I go back to journey and this idea of a strategic plan. They were fully informed of all the ups and downs, successes and failures. There were a strong commitment to engaging with them at every milestone within the organization. So they felt very connected and they embraced this way of thinking. And as a result, they were able to invest in us that way.
I want to say 2 quick things about that, if it's okay. One, when he said every board member makes this 5-year commitment, that includes poor people on the board. I mean, people with very little money are making what for them is a big stretch of commitment over 5 years. Someone who had been an intern and then we asked to join our board, who's a student, 22 years old, made a 5-year commitment of $500 a year. For him that's a giant stretch. Another member of the board who had been a True Colors member, a True Colors troop member when she was young, now as an adult she had been in foster care, homeless, now as a young black trans woman, and that population is just so screwed in our economy. She is now a social worker as an adult, working with youth who are in the situation she was in. She made a commitment of $1,000 a year to this. So we were able to go to people with a lot more sources and say, like, if you believe in your community, you need to respond to these people who have anteed up themselves at a level that's a huge stretch for them. What are you going to do? I don't want you to do the same as Nia Clark, who is earning, 100th of what you are, because zero wealth compared to you. She's coming through with $1,000 a year. What are you going to do? It really helped us make our argument that our community was so strongly behind this. The other, go ahead.
So in a matter of, I think there's a time check.
Oh.
We have.
We've got almost 30 minutes.
So we should definitely get to this.
Yeah.
Do you have any other questions about operations? Go.
Is anyone else? So you've been underwritten for this time. Is there any earned income?
Yes. So I think a big change in earned. What are you going to talk about earned income?
Yeah, I can talk about before, and then we can talk about PYTA.
Yeah, okay, great.
So, with the out in your neighborhood approach, it was intentional to remove barriers to accessing art. Therefore, there wasn't an earned income strategy necessarily. We were looking to funders and individuals to underwrite so folks can attend our shows. That shifted with the growth of our youth program, True Colors, which Abel talked about.
So we were in search of where earned income could come from, and we still are. It's still, we haven't met that challenge completely, but we looked at what our assets were, what our strengths were, and what we could monetize. And one thing that was clear was that we were a leader in the nation in this burgeoning field of queer youth theater. We identified a funder and about a dozen other queer youth theater programs around the country, a funder that wanted to support us as a group. We helped convene that. It formed as the Pride Youth Theater Alliance, and we got the contract with that ad hoc group and the funder to operate this alliance out of our offices. So we have a contract that's over $100,000 a year to operate that alliance, and most of the, that really helps our income
That's
side.
the second battleground.
That's what?
The second battleground.
The second battleground, exactly, that's what I was thinking when it said up there. And also coordinating is another thing that he mentioned this morning. This existed, this queer youth theater thing existed. It started out with actually 8 groups that we first identified, and now there are almost 30, because we've incubated new programs in Charlotte, North Carolina, Lexington, Kentucky, Youngstown, Ohio, Wausau, Wisconsin, Memphis, Tennessee, New Orleans. So this is a real thing that we were able to help build around the country.
So going back, since you were underwritten for 100% of the need, were there restrictions on the money? One of the questions I had about the compensation fund, was there any sort of eyebrows being raised about that? How did you?
The board, no eyebrows were raised. It was important, the board understands that for us to be successful.
Funders?
Funders, yeah.
We didn't make a big fuss about it to the funders, but it was included in our budgets, and it didn't seem to raise any eyebrows. I mean, I think we were so poorly paid before that seeing that we were investing in that didn't alarm anybody. The part of you asked before that was about
the restrictions.
The restrictions. So, something that, I mean, I don't know how many situations this would work in, but out in your neighborhood was all of our work. Like, everything was included. And so things that were just project support or program support, our project or our program was out in your neighborhood. And it was everything. So we made that argument well to people, and it worked for when it needed to. I mean, now when we're applying things to things we can afford to negotiate restrictions if necessary, but at this time, we need, restrictions could have killed us. So we fought hard against them. Other questions about that?
So, number 4, organize, promote outness as our organizing principle. This was one of the new concentration areas added to our 5-year strategic plan. With our, we cannot defeat homophobia without first dismantling racism and holding an anti-racist light to all the work that we do. So, one thing we can say, a strategic plan is an idea that's very nimble. And it's important to have a great idea, have a lot of folks buy into it, but also hold us accountable. And what's important about this is how can we leverage coming out in the queer community? What is the TTO spin to that? And the principle of organizing around outness is, as individuals, everyone in this room, to understand our privilege in certain systems. And in areas where we can make a difference, speak up. And the idea of inspiring outness in our communities, it's exactly that. Knowing what actually I'm going to read the exact definition for you. It's pretty amazing. one of those things where it's really good.
I have it here if you want to look at my screen.
Okay. So while the term out is most often associated with the LGBT movement, the concept of outness resonates far beyond it. Outness is the way in which people's personal identity can contribute to a movement, identify in society's privileged systems, and compel an activist to be more honest about our relationships in those systems, and contribute to the dismantling of racism, sexism, classism, and other institutional oppressions. So that's what that principle is. And our community members, our staff, folks who are deeply invested in our work, this is the value they're holding us accountable for.
That's great.
An example of how that plays out in organizing is Marcel. Marcel White is a member of our True Colors Creative Action Crew. The Creative Action Crew, after they've gone through the troop process and learned how to create work, they then take on the responsibility of year-round leading workshops in the community and presenting performances year-round, whereas the troop has a very strict schedule it works on every year. Marcel, who is autistic on the spectrum, developed a workshop that he now leads on, and it's a movement-based workshop, on how people on the spectrum can be fully participate in arts creation process, and how organizations that are serving youth can integrate people on the spectrum into their work better. And he has now presented that workshop at sister arts groups of ours all around the city. And that, my friends, is outness, right?
Yeah.
He is saying, this is who I am, I'm proud of it, I own it, and that allows me to organize. Whereas when he was closeted about his autism, there was no way for him to even connect with people, much less become a leader in our city, which he is now. So that's exactly what we mean by this outness resonating far beyond just the LGBT community.
That's great. That's great.
Other questions about that or comments?
To wrap it up, key learnings. We're just gonna take them all. There's 4 right there. One thing to understand with our strategic plan, it's a good idea. It's a plan that we use to take our donors, our other funders, our patrons, the people we serve, our young people on this journey with us. It's not a checklist. The checklist is the action plan. It's the working plan. Because of having stronger operations and cash reserve, we're able to be nimble and change our operations plan when it's not working. And we've experienced that. We've had to be that nimble over the past 2.5 years, where we are doing a lot of work, but are we really living our mission and living our value of outness? Are we really looking at the art through an anti-racist lens? And what we decided, because we are that nimble, is to stop some of the programming, to really take a look at how we are engaging with our community members through this work. So the important part is, to have a strategic plan and say, check, 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 we're now doing something great. Have a strong idea, support it with a strong narrative, and create an operations plan that's nimble, that addresses the strategic plan, but it's nimble enough where the folks who are committed to seeing the implementation of your strategic plan can come back and say, this action here, it's not working, it's not living your mission, it doesn't take into consideration that what you're currently doing is perpetuating a system that exists, and being responsive to that, and having a strong structure, a board in place that's fully committed to this, having strong, cash management, that you could stop and really look at the work through these lenses. Made it very important for us.
And the past year has really tested this, and that's not always been pretty. It's been very, very difficult. Since Ferguson last summer, not this past summer, but the summer before, and especially since last November when the grand jury ruling came out, our staff, who's, as I said, majority people of color and also majority under 30, has been feeling a tremendous amount of pain. It's not like any of this was new, but there's a way in which these horrors have been lifted up, which is a good thing, but it just means that it's pain, pain, pain all day, every day. And our organization has made an effort to be there for this stuff, but has not always succeeded. People feel very frustrated sometimes. Well, just a second, if this is our strategy, why am I, right when Ferguson is happening, I'd like to be out on the street with a theater offensive action tomorrow about that, but instead I'm working on some big show that we're doing next week. So this has caused us, we all went back and sat down and reread around a table together, reread the whole strategic plan out
6
loud.
hours, the entire staff.
Yeah, and kind of said okay, what does this mean to us now? And that has not been pretty. It's been difficult. And I just want to be very upfront about that. And there's a lot of hurt, a lot of anger that we can't do all this better right now. But there's also a lot of commitment, and people are determined to stick with this and see if we can help our communities with this, if we can help ourselves in our determination and to stick with it. This is at Pride this past June. That's Sydney, and our theme was Black Lives Matter, to just illustrate what I'm talking about. And we were assaulted by people on the street yelling the N-word at some of our members, coming out and physically threatening people just because we had a Black Lives Matter theme for our presence at the annual Pride demonstration. And so for our staff, for instance, so these things it's still real, in a place like Boston. This stuff it's not like racism has gone away or homophobia has gone away. The things are very, very real every day. And in this situation, it was exhilarating to be together out there. It reminded me in some ways of the early days of our movement and my involvement in it, and feeling that both threatened from outside but supported by the people around me. But for some of the younger people, it was not okay. They felt like, well, this is my job, and it's required to me to be in a place where I'm being assaulted. So we've had a lot of struggle over that. So these are examples of where the problems still lie in front of us.
And this conversation happens, the strategic plan conversation happens every day, every week, at all levels of the organization. We're constantly referring back to it to make sure the action plan we have in place is fulfilling that plan. And if it's not, how do we as leaders in the organization work together with staff and board members and community allies to make sure our operations and our actions are living that mission?
So one of the main ways we've done that in response over the past year is we've created a series of community speak-outs. And they're called speak-outs, but actually they're kind of act-outs, because these are events where we bring together a few dozen community members, about half of whom are familiar with our work, and about half of whom are folks who are from the neighborhoods where we're working but don't know the theater offensive already. And we do art-making exercises with them that are designed to give us feedback about our work. What do those folks want in the neighborhood? What do they see happening now? And they create, I don't think we have any images here today, but they create work that expresses what they want from the theater offensive. And we can integrate that into our planning. So that's a regular part of our planning process now.
And we're also integrated anti-racist work in our fundraising. You know, people may see fundraising at, you know, Cash's Green, but I can't say fucking, well, I just did. We've met sometimes where we've created an atmosphere where it was disrespectful or it wasn't peace. It wasn't the right atmosphere for folks. And we heard that feedback, and it really hurts when, you know, as a social justice organization, you're doing a fundraising event that does not necessarily reflect the values. And as a result, we've come back in-house and really look at what we're creating in terms of fundraising and how we can use these values to have an atmosphere where everyone is respected and we're not being, you know, exploited our youth or so on. It's just being very intentional about every part of the organization and the messaging that goes out around fundraising. But we're also very practical to understand that there's a reality out there that we need to understand, and how can we as a group work within those models and find different entry points for us to get in, and as a group with other organizations in Boston work together under the social justice lens to support each other. At the EDI yesterday, the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion discussion yesterday, you know, something that stuck with me, a lot of folks are, you know, let's come together and go in front of the funders. The funders also report to a board, and they have people who are making these decisions. As an arts ecosystem, we should support each other. And I think what's working, you know, well, could be working better. What's working well with us in our Boston Cultural Change Network, which is a group of arts organization committed to social justice and anti-racism work, is we're sharing all this information with each other. We're attending each other's shows. We're introducing other organizations to funders who are in our circle. It's a supportive community. And that's important because, you know, the model sucks sometimes, how funds come to an organization, but we have to figure out what is the fourth option. And we have the power to do that as a group, working together.
Do you all have any thoughts?
Can I ask a question? It's actually it's two-part. When you were talking about developing the three-axis and to really analyze all your programs, can I hear what those three were again? And then, who did you bring in to go through that process? Because I can only imagine how painful that would be, and how no, we can't give that up, or we can't, even if it didn't check the boxes you needed it to check.
So that's a great question. There are some very sophisticated tools that are much more complex than this. We literally sat down with a piece of paper and made the three-axis thing. I guess that's three-dimensional. But, but there are tools out there that I've seen that are much better and more complex than this, and you're putting in really hard data that you can produce from QuickBooks on it and other sources. This, the three axes we had was, does it generate or use resources? Does it draw resources toward the organization or away from the organization? To or away? This axis was, does it address our mission really deeply or not address our mission really deeply? And then the third one was size. Because, you know, if something's loses money but it's really great at the mission and it's small, that's kind of okay. If it loses a lot of money and it is on mission but it's huge, you can't do it even though it meets the mission, you know, because you're broke. So the size matters.
Yeah.
Did that answer your question?
Absolutely.
Okay.
With all love and respect, because I too myself am now seasoned. I'm looked at as seasoned. Could you both talk about the joys and challenges of the multi-generational partnership and how you accept that energy and how you...
Multi-generational partnership. Oh wow. You mean like internal, like the...
Yeah, you guys together.
Us two together.
Us two?
Yeah. Is it easy? Is it hard? Is that too personal?
It's actually good.
Yeah.
It's actually good for us because I wish Evelyn was here too, our director of programs. We're all three different people. We all manage and lead very differently. But what we have together is the passion for the mission. You know, I am very rigid and practical, and it's the numbers, and I'm like, okay, I get it. I know what we need to do to bring in $1.2 million.
Yeah, me too.
I'm very familiar with the field. I'm very in touch with their donors and the funding world. And it works for me. Abe is very different. He's like the father. We get to see, he and Evelyn is director of programs.
Auntie.
I don't want to speak on Evelyn's behalf, but she built True Colors. She understands the youth element. She understands evaluation tools. She brings a very different perspective than what I bring. And Abe is somewhere smack in the middle. And you want to talk about you, but overall,
I have no perspective. I could say that from my point of view, that the intergenerational aspect of it is one of the greatest pleasures of it for me. And it's challenging, but in exactly the ways I'm interested in. So I love, one of the things that, that I wish there was more time to talk about is the art that's come out of this. And the intergenerational art making is tremendously satisfying for me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm just letting you all know we've got 7 minutes left.
Oh, wow.
Got a lot of time.
Okay, I'm gonna start. I do have a question, I promise, but Adrian, I'm so glad that you're here. This was a phenomenal presentation. I just have to take a moment to say how brave and extraordinary it is, Abe, to have a founder be willing to pivot like this in such a meaningful way. And so fully and with such integrity. It is rare, and I think that there's so many lessons that we're obviously garnering, but there's so many founder-driven organizations that really, I feel like, are going to go to the grave with their founders. And you have really given new life in a way that looking at sustainability, and I think that it's extraordinary. So I just have to say, you're amazing. The question is, could you spend a little time giving us maybe 2 examples, because I'm so fascinated about this 6-month timeout to dive into these neighborhoods and to create real beginnings and continuations of existing relationships that got a little deeper. What does the work look like, and how could you give us 2 examples of how those little spots are maybe different from one another?
Yes.
What you're making there.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the very first event that we had after this, so it was 6 months after we dove into the plan, so it was in the winter of 2010, I guess, was a collaboration with Inquilinos Boricuas en Acción, IBA, which is a housing project in the South End that's overwhelmingly Puerto Rican, and is we had it. There's a restaurant in the project, and we worked with a young woman named Natasha, who is a young dyke who grew up there. Her brother is a voguer, and she had done drum majorette stuff when she was a kid, and she started a twirling troupe in the project. And so that's called South End Dynamite, and we're still one of their biggest sponsors. And we worked with her and about 8 other performing and visual artists from the 2-block radius around the projects, including folks who lived in the projects and other queer people of color who lived within a block, around it. And put together, we just called it a performance feast. It was at the restaurant that's in the project, and it was free, but people could make a donation towards the food, and people just performed for each other, and the performances were interspersed with times of just hanging out at the tables. There were issues of discussions that were hot in that housing project at that time. Issues that they were facing that were literally written out on the tables up for discussion if people wanted to discuss them, but they could talk about whatever they wanted. And the peak of that, I mean, there was about 8 performances, but the peak was when the girls' twirling troupe burst into the restaurant from the street and took it over and put on an amazing show. I should mention one of the artists that we were working with was a world-renowned costume designer, actually. He was Latino it was all Latinos from that neighborhood. And he took some of his like world-class costumes that he had designed for different shows around the world and fit them on the girls' twirling troupe. So they started off, they came in with these amazing costumes and then took off and had their twirling outfits. So so that was an example.
Yeah, thanks.
And
That 6-month timeout specifically resourced and funded? I mean, did you seek resources to do that?
It was, it is part of Out in Your Neighborhood. It's taken, it's still considered part of the project. You know, listening, community listening to get input on how to create art with their neighbors. So it didn't deviate from the initial project.
Beautiful.
we did propose it, and Roberta Uno at the Ford Foundation was like, you know, that is, nobody ever asks for that, and it's exactly what I wish they would all do. But she's not there anymore. So.
So stretch that out.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you all very much.
Good.